Hi, EPC. I'm hoping everybody is doing well, and I'm looking forward to getting together back here in the sanctuary where I am today. I'm looking forward to us being able to get back together in smaller groups at least in the next couple weeks, where we're going to have to wait till phase one kind of plays its way out, and then hopefully in phase two, we're going to be allowed to gather in groups of 50 or 100. And our plans right now are to do a couple small worship services where the numbers are under 50. And then in between those worship services, we will Clorox wipe everything and sanitize everything for the next group of people to come in. And we're hoping to have lots of hand sanitizer on hand, and hoping to do it very safe. There'll be some changes, things like passing the offering plate. We're not going to be able to do that for a while. We'll figure out how to do communion together. We'll figure out how to greet one another a little differently. But those things they're minor to what we're experiencing right now with not being able to get together. So I'm looking forward to just hopefully in just a couple weeks, at least some of you who feel safe being back here in the sanctuary. And for those of you that don't feel safe, we're still going to continue to live stream. I think we've discovered live streaming is going to be here to stay. Now, one interesting thing about the live stream is that we are attracting people from not just EPC watching the live stream, but actually all over the world watching our live stream, which is rather interesting to think about. And so, we on our Sundays we have 100 or so people watching. Our 100 people or so in the sanctuary, and on a live stream during the week, we could get lots of views on our live stream. And between Joe's live stream and my live stream, on a good week, we've had close to 1,400 views on both those videos. And so, in continuing this Sunday, we're going to switch over and we're going to do a sermon series on Daniel, the book of Daniel. And I think it's going to be really helpful to us because I think it's going to speak to the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's also going to speak to kind of the marginalization of Christianity in our time right now, the 2020. I think it's going to speak to both of those. In fact, my plan is to give a point on each of those scenarios in the sermon. And I'm looking forward to it, and I hope you will look forward to it with me. One of the things that we've discovered with live streaming is that we need to keep the sermon time kind of down. That we need to keep it a little shorter than we normally would if we were here in the sanctuary. And so, in doing so, I'm having to pare down my sermons, and I know Joe is having to pare down his stuff. He has multiple points, and he's trying to get through all of them, so he's had to pare them down as well. But what I thought I'd do is to do some Bible study in between. And so today we're going to talk about context, the context of the book of Daniel. And in doing so, we need to go over some history in our Old Testament. And so King Solomon, you know him. In fact, let's go back. King Saul was the first king of Israel, and then King David came into play, and then his son Solomon. After Solomon came Solomon's son Rehoboam. And what happened is during the reign of Saul and David and Solomon, the nation of Israel was one nation. They had one king, and the king was in David's time and Solomon's time was in Jerusalem. Well, when Rehoboam came to power, the Israelites came to him and said, look, your dad was a great king, but he worked us to death. He made us build his houses, made us build his palaces, made us build his pools, made us build the temple, made us build roads and all sorts of infrastructure, and we're worn out and we're tired. And so if you will give us rest, if you will give us some time to recoup, if you will give us the resources to go home and do what we need to do, we will serve you even better than we served your father. And so Rehoboam took that, and he went and got the advice from his wise counsel. And his wise counsel said, yeah, you need to listen to the Israelites. And then he went and got advice from his frat brothers, from his old college roommates, if you will. And they didn't give him great advice, and he took their advice. And he said to them, so he comes back to the people of Israel and says, I'm going to work you harder than my daddy did. I'm a bigger man than my dad is, and I'm going to require more of you, and you're just going to have to suck it up and deal with it. Well, that didn't sit well with the Israelite people, and they rebelled against him. And what ended up happening is that there was a civil war and a fracture of the nation of Israel. And the nation of Israel became two kingdoms, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. Now, the northern kingdom was ruled by a man named Jeroboam. And Jeroboam led the northern kingdom along with all the other northern kings. There was not really a great northern king at all. In fact, to my recollection, they're all horrific kings and led the northern kingdom into sin after sin after sin. And Jeroboam actually restarted the worship of the golden calf from Aaron in the book of Exodus. And so they didn't have a great relationship with God, yet God kept pursuing them. God kept pursuing them. And finally, God just had enough, and he sent in the nation of Assyria to conquer them. And the nation of Assyria were notorious. They were horrific conquerors, if you will. They took all the Israelite people in the northern kingdom and deported them. Everybody they could get their hands on, they deported to other places they had conquered, and then they transplanted the people from those other places into Israel. And so the northern kingdom was destroyed. And then the Assyrian kingdom came after the southern kingdom, which was ruled by David's line of family. And there were faithful kings all during that line. And it just so happened that during this time when Assyria had conquered Israel, there was a faithful king sitting on the throne named Hezekiah. And Hezekiah pours out his heart to God about what's about to happen. And God pushes back the Assyrian army miraculously. And Hezekiah ends up being freed from the Assyrian conquest. In fact, the whole nation, southern kingdom, was saved. But Hezekiah was followed by his son Manasseh. And Manasseh was the worst of the worst of the worst of kings. He led the nation, the southern nation of Judah and the other tribe of Benjamin. He led them into horrific sin. He led them back into sacrificing their children and all sorts of idols. And it was just a horrific time. And after Manasseh came his son Ammon. And Ammon was just as bad. Following Ammon came probably, it may have been even the greatest king of Israel, Josiah. And Josiah restored Judah back to God, put people back into worshiping in the temple, tore down the idols, tore down the temples of the idols. I mean, he brought about restoration. And anyway, it wasn't, even though Josiah was a good king, it was too late. And Babylon was sent by God, a king named Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians, they weren't as bad as the Assyrians, but they were extremely terrible people, if you will. But they deported the bright and the nobles and the royals. And so that's where we get Daniel. Daniel was in the first deportation to the Babylonian nation. And so that's kind of the context, the history behind how we get to Daniel. Just a few other things I was thinking about. And just so you know, Daniel was taken in the first deportation under the rule of Jehoiakim. He was also taken, and we'll find this out, the gold vessels were taken from the Temple of Solomon to Babylon as well. And you'll hear about that story with Belshazzar. That's in Daniel chapter 5, I think. And then Ezekiel, he was taken in the second deportation under Jehoiachin, who was Jehoiakim's son. And that guy only reigned about 3 months and then was taken as well to Babylon. And then there was a third deportation under a king named Mathaniah, or as Nebuchadnezzar named him, Zedekiah. And he was taken in the third deportation because he tried to rebel against Babylon by making a treaty with Egypt. And so Nebuchadnezzar sent his armies in, and they executed Zedekiah or Mathaniah's sons, and they poked out his eyes, and they put him in prison, and they tore down the temple, they destroyed the walls, and so forth. And so that's kind of the history as we get into the book of Daniel. It's not a great history to think about, but it is what it is, and we'll get into talking a little bit more about that. The book of Daniel covers the events from 605 BC to about 536 BC. Just some contemporaries of Daniel. Jeremiah was a contemporary. Habakkuk and Ezekiel, probably, we know Ezekiel was, Habakkuk probably was. The Babylonian kings were Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar. Daniel also served under Persian kings, King Darius and Cyrus. Daniel is split into two different parts. Chapters 1 through 6 are kind of the narratives. It's what's behind Daniel. That's the story of Daniel. It's how he worshiped God, and they're as we'll find, they're incredible stories, and you probably know some of them. And then from chapter 7 on to chapter 12, Daniel becomes very apocalyptic. In fact, every chapter in Daniel is referred to or inferred to in the book of Revelation. In fact, you can even go further and say we could not even begin to understand the book of Revelation without knowing the book of Daniel. And so there's a couple themes that are going to run through the sermon series. The first is that God calls His people to be faithful even in tough times, because God is faithful. The second big, and this is really the major theme of the book, is God is sovereign, that He's in control, that He's got it, that it's His world, that it's His people, and He's sovereign over it. There's a couple other smaller themes. God calls us to purpose and obedience, and perseverance in prayer. And so I think we're really going to kind of be able to jump into the book of Daniel, and I'm hoping it's going to be relevant for all of us. We're kind of all going to be able to plug into it. And so I'm going to end kind of with that today, and look forward to Sunday's sermon, which is going to be chapter 1 if you want to read ahead. And like I said, I'm looking forward to being back with you in this place, in our sanctuary together. But until then, please remember, if this situation has taught us anything, if COVID-19, the pandemic, has taught us anything, it's our relationships with God. It's our relationship with God and our relationships with our family and our friends and our church family that are the important things. And so I hope we have learned that, and I know I've seen it, and I've heard the stories in our church about how we're really connecting with one another, even though we can't be physically together. And I'm very, very thankful for that throughout our church. And so I'll say goodbye at this point and look forward to Sunday.